I'm Steph, that quirky bird girl. Oh, hold up, I just heard a western osprey. Oh, it's a laughing kookaburra and a blue jay. Oh, and don't even get me started on the belted kingfisher. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe and hit that follow button. Watch my TV show one day.
My name is Steph. I am that quirky bird girl. I look like a massive pot right up there. And I will be talking to you all today about the joy of birds, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, but I'll be talking about it with a little bit of a different lens. And we'll get into that in just a few seconds. But we'll be rediscovering ourselves a little bit through nature. And just before I get into a few of the slides, I want to call out what we're looking at here because this is my home base and where I get lots and lots of joy with my work with kids and adults. But this is Central Park. And this area right here is actually called Bow Bridge. And that's where a lot of our barn swallows nest. Beautiful birds if you haven't had the chance to see them, but really good education opportunities. And if any of you are in New York City, please reach out. And I'll have my contact information at the end of our slides here today. So before we get into it, I want to share a little bit about me, the work that I do, and the people that I reach. So here are a few photos, but as you can tell, I've got a smile in nearly all of them. So the smile is core to the work that I do. I teach people about joy, resilience, and curiosity. And so through that work, I have about 12,000 followers across platforms. I have hosted 850 plus in-person event attendees. And those are people that typically have never experienced birds. So these are first-time bird watchers, bird lovers, and kind of pulling them into our world a little bit. And I've also reached over 500,000 people through social media content. And that's all, for the most part, entry-level bird watching to get people excited and energized about birds in the same way we experienced and have experienced this past weekend. And I do that through entrepreneurship, influencer work. So I talked about the content. I'm also a joy architect. So I curate experiences around joy. I'm a podcast host, NYC events host, writer, running educator, bird guide. All of this stuff was brought about by my move to New York City. And I'll share a little bit about what my life looked like before that as we get into some of our conversations around joy. But all of that tells you about a little bit about what I do, but it doesn't actually tell you who I am, right? So I want to talk to you about some of the core values that drives the content that I make and the work that I do. So bravery is one really big one, and we'll link that back to birds towards the end of our time together. But resilience, kindness, self-kindness, and you'll notice I've broken those two out together because I find there is a significant difference between the two and lessons that we can learn from birds separate from those two groups. So I talk about curiosity, asking questions that maybe feel a little uncomfortable to ask, humor. So integrating, if you attended one of my bird walk or the bird walk yesterday, you know we got a chance to name some really cool birds. One of them, Halloween, I can't recall the last name, but comes with Baltimore Orioles. So just integrating some fun, laughter, and ways that we can connect with one another. Community, hugely important for the work that I do. Acceptance and self-acceptance, growth, and then finally, the most important. But to understand the work that I do and the work that I'm building off of, we have to first understand what is joy. So I'd love to hear from y'all. What do you, just feel free to shout out. What is joy to you?
Being outside.
Outside. Okay, outside. Do you say
Rainbows, my children.
rainbows, your children? Love that. So experiences and loved ones. Anyone else?
It's a choice.
Oh, yes. You touched on pieces that
It has nothing to do with circumstances.
nothing to do with circumstances. I love that. Okay. All right. So all of those pieces will be touched upon in a definition. I'll show it just a few seconds. So joy is an intentional choice for self in which happiness is curated, nurtured, and selected for the betterment of community, self, and the environment. So every single word that's been chosen in this sentence or written in this sentence has been done intentionally. And what I mean by that is that this definition allows us to connect to ourselves and also connect to the environment around us. So Intentional choice means we show up knowing that I want to experience something a little bit differently. I want to experience something that maybe I haven't seen yet, or maybe that I haven't felt yet. Because at the end of the day, that's what joy is about. And you're doing it for self. So you're not doing it for the perception to change folks. You're doing it because it makes you feel some sort of way. It's curated, meaning that you create the circumstances in which you experience joy. It's nurtured, so you take care of that joy, you care for that joy. And it's selected for the betterment of community, self, and the environment. I believe that joy is a fundamental human right that brings us all together. And in order for us to experience this joy, and oftentimes coming back to our childhood when we used to so easily connect back to that joy, there are experiences within that make it harder for us to connect to joy. And I'm going to talk about what that experience is. Every single one of us in this room has a shared, singular, common, yet unique in the way that we experience it, experience. And that unique shared experience is grief. And so we all experience grief very differently. And you might not be even expecting a conversation around grief as I talk about joy, but grief is essential in accessing that joy as we enter and age into our adulthood. So I'll give another definition. If you can't tell, I'm a linguist. I love my definitions. But grief is a human process and reaction after significant loss or experiences not gone to plan. So I use this definition, and oftentimes folks link grief to a loss of a family member, and that absolutely is grief. But grief is also the loss of experiences. It's your loss of hearing. It's the loss of friends. It's the loss of a marriage. And so it can be much larger than what we traditionally see grief as today, or what we might experience it. We're all in this room experiencing grief to a certain degree. And there are quite a few stages that we can get into related to grief, and I'll talk about those. But arguably, psychologists have said there are even more that can be expanded on based on different cultural circumstances and the type of grief that we're talking about. But I want to talk about these 5, and in between each, bridges through joy in order for us to come out into the other side of these grief cycles. So we have denial, we have anger, bargaining, which if you're not familiar with bargaining, that can look like, I wish I did more. I wish there was something different that happened, or just a desire to change the circumstances. We have depression, and lastly, acceptance. And the last 2 are often where we struggle accessing the most, particularly as we age. It seems that most folks end up stuck in this bargaining phase. And often what we can do to help us, I call it a bridge into these other phases of depression and acceptance, is joy. And as I'm talking about this, I want to remind us that healing is not linear. So the access to joy and the experience into joy it's not that you go through those 5 and then they're done. And we all know that. I probably don't even necessarily need to say that. But there are days and times where you might go through the grief process day after day after day. There are times where you might not feel grief for 3 years, and then all of a sudden you feel it on that 3rd year in one day. So just reminding us that we are human, and that means that we kind of sometimes go with the flow of those 5 experiences to give ourselves a little bit of self-kindness as we move through those. And that's what joy is for. As I'm talking about healing not being linear, I want to share a little bit about how I got to this place and who I was kind of in between, and introduce you to a different version of me. Not the one that you see in front of you today, but the one in 2023 who was struggling post-COVID, didn't feel like I had anywhere to go, and was deep, deep, deep in the throes of grief. And I felt like I didn't have anywhere to talk about it. So this is me. And as you could tell, still bird lover, of course. Cheers. And I did have the fortune of seeing them, but at the time, I wasn't sure whether or not I was ever going to reconnect with my love for birds. I was walking with a cane, as you can see, newly disabled because of a condition that I acquired post COVID from long COVID. And I was told by a physician that I would actually never walk again. And that was, as you can imagine, world rocking. I was also processing a family loss. So the person who introduced me to nature was no longer in my life. And I didn't know if I could hold on to that memory. I was newly diagnosed with ADHD and a few other neurodivergencies, and I felt isolated. I didn't know where or how to find my people, and I didn't even know if they were out there. Um, and I was divorced, newly divorced, and going through just a turmoil time where it was really hard for me to get back out with birds and reconnect to my love, to my joy. And during this period of time, I actually stopped going out to experience birds for my own joy and my own benefit. And I started creating content online. And that was kind of my funnel through joy, or at least my hope at the time. But I say all of this to say that um, joy does not exist in a vacuum. And what I mean by that is that it's a part of your larger experiences. So through grief and other emotional processes, I experienced joy within community in smaller ways. So I was able to find those folks online that were able to help me reconnect back to myself and understand that grief was part of the experience, but it wasn't the whole experience. And at that point in time, I was stuck in thinking that it was the whole experience and that I wasn't going to be able to get out. And that's why community became such an important and valuable value to me. But it only exists when we accept the grief we so desperately want to avoid. That was the hardest thing for me. I think I was stuck in that second and third that I talked a little bit earlier. So the bargaining, if I had just done X, Y, Z differently, then it would have turned out differently. And without that connection to joy, I would have never been able to, again, cross the bridge into what I experience and provide to folks today. So the question becomes, how do we accept the grief to get to the joy? Well, in a lot of ways, doing things like you all are doing now, which are here with the birds, reconnecting to yourselves, to the outdoors, and hopefully some mindfulness if you've had an opportunity to participate. For me, it was running. So I actually had to defy what that doctor told me and find a way that I could kind of go against the grain. So I started running. I have my first marathon coming up in September. So I'm really excited, but defying it was part of my grief process. So I went a little bit in the other direction. Traveling is a really good way to support the grief process and get back into joy. A new city was one of my answers. And ultimately my work centers around value-based approaches. And so that's what I'll be introducing you all to today. And then ultimately community. Bringing people together, getting people together who have similar experiences. Grief makes us profoundly hard on ourselves for one reason. Our mind often becomes a place that we want to escape from. So I alluded to this a little bit earlier when I said that it was hard to get outside with the birds. But one thing with nature, when you are outside, and I'm sure you all have experienced this, it calms your brain down, calms your nervous system down just enough for you to hear the noise in the background. And oftentimes that can be the hardest part about grief. It's the silence, it's not the noise. And what birds show us is that if we're able to slow down and notice, then maybe, just maybe, that noticing is enough. And by extension, we are as well. I'm going to get into my philosophy now and what kind of built from all of these experiences. I mentioned earlier a values-based bird approach, but I use these cards to teach adults and kids how to relate to birds. So anthropomorphizing, if you're not familiar, that is the core of my work. Grief is not a one-size-fits-all. But rather a value-based approach is as close as it gets to supporting you in experiences through grief. So I take these bird experiences and lessons to make them our own using curiosity, joy, and awe. I want to do an exercise a little bit with you all, and feel free to shout out if you'd like to, but I'm just going to read a few of the questions. Now, this lovely bird on the left, you all know who he is. American robin. This is one of my absolute favorites to talk about, particularly when we're talking about grief. These birds are incredibly resilient, and I've got a few questions for you. So, who is this bird to you? Do they sing? What do they like or look like when they are looking for food? What can we learn from them? Would we consider anything that they do to be, I mean, objectively, maybe if you have a car or windows, you might. And then how are they different from humans? Are they different from us? I mean, objectively, yes, we are not this small, plush, little red orange bird, but there are some things that we might be able to relate to in their experiences while we watch them. So when we do that, when we slow down enough to pay attention to what it is that they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, we get a few lessons. So birds are unique, yet still utterly beautiful. So every single bird that we see, and I'm of the opinion that there is not an ugly bird, so hopefully y'all are aligned with that. But every single bird that we see, we admire their beauty. We stop, we take a second to enjoy them. I don't think there's ever been a single bird that I've said, that's an ugly bird. And if we apply that lesson with kids and adults, we're able to admire and experience our own beauty as well. They learn without shame. That's a really big humanistic characteristic. So we apply shame to near everything. And if you're not familiar with the concept of shame, the best way that I can describe it is an experience through which we become upset with ourselves for natural human experiences, mistakes, learnings, growings, failures, all of those things fold into what we experience oftentimes with shame. But they learn without it. So how have they done that? How have they been able to live their whole lives, make mistakes, grow, and just keep going? And mind you, they are all in survival mode. So how are they doing this? That's what we're learning. They are themselves holistically, meaning that they sing and they sing and they sing and they sing. They don't stop just because it annoys one person. They are themselves holistically. And I think that's something that we can take away too. You know, there are going to be people, experiences, times where other folks don't agree with us. And I think that birds can help us access a little bit more of ourselves. They experience loss, funerals with some species. So American crows are one of them. I've actually seen a Canada goose funeral as well, and acceptance. So we can learn a lot from them in the way that they process and experience loss and to accept our own. They are constantly in survival, yet they seem to have fun. Okay, so one of my favorite things to do with kids is to sit on the ground and just watch American robins. I love watching them because they do this little like and what they're doing is they're hearing these little words move around in the ground. They're not moving with their eyes, not moving with their beak. They're moving with their sound. So they're following, but it creates this very fun dance to watch them just sort of boop, 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 jumping around the ground. And they're themselves, right? They're not looking at who's looking at me? What are they doing? Why are they They're not asking those questions. They're doing what they know is best for them, doing it because it's an instinct. There's lessons we can learn from that to help support our own processes as well. So it's a little bit about our American robins and the kinds of lessons that I do in Central Park. A few values do require anthropomorphizing. So this is not an ornithologist's favorite talk, I imagine, but it's important for us to look at them and acknowledge some different pieces that we can take away. So I just talked about joy, American robin, so them bouncing around. Love it. And then we have self-kindness. So I put that as a bald eagle. Now, for a bald eagle, they are only successful 32% of the time looking for food, right? That's a really, really low percentage. For my favorite bird, the Western osprey, they're successful 72% of the time. Significant differences between the two, right? Not once do these bald eagles look at the Western osprey and they're like, you know what? Well, okay, of course we can't read their mind, but that the bald eagle's not like, well, I'm just not good enough. I should just give up and call it a day. No, they're going to chase that Western osprey for the fish. They're going to keep looking, keep hunting, keep adapting, asking themselves different ways that they can get their food. And you have to be kind to yourself in that process. We have resilience. So Western ospreys, I talked a little bit about how they are, I'd love to talk about how they are excellent parents. They come back to the nest typically year after year, regardless of how successful that nest might be. Love them. And then we have kindness as blue jays. So you might not think of blue jays as kind. In a lot of ways, they aren't. However, I like to look at some of the communal behavior that they display. So in large blue jay communities, typically what you'll have is an outlook or an overlooker bird. An overlooker. And they will be sort of making sure there are no red-tailed hawks. They'll be the one that kind of does the dive bombing. They're doing the red-tailed hawk call, faking all of that. They're keeping an eye out for their community and making sure that every single blue jay is safe. That's kindness. It's community, but kindness. We have bravery for our amazing Canada geese. So I have seen personally Canada geese go toe to toe with dogs in Central Park. They are fierce and they do not stop. And then we have self-trust. So any migrating species, we all know in this room how difficult it must be for a migratory species to travel all the way Central America up to the United States, back down again year and year. It's a lot of work and that can be exhausting. And so the fact that they're able to trust themselves in knowing where they're heading, sometimes they might not even know, but that self-trust is something that we can learn a little bit from. So kind of bringing us a little bit full circle here, but in order to access the joy of our inner child, we must first reconcile the experiences that happened in what I call sometimes the ugly middle. What I mean by this is that there are experiences that we have had through our lives, for example, our careers, maybe it's grief, different layers that have pulled us away from that connection to joy in our childhood. And if we can accept and move through the grief process of that ugly middle, then we can get back to that joy. This is just a photo of my community and a few of the values that we talk about, as well as some of the pieces that we use to make this community really come to life. What I really just want to take away from this slide is that we are kind of taking bird-based experiences and applying them to our own to help us move through some of these different values. And unfortunately, in today's world, it is so easy to lose our connection to joy. And it might seem strange, particularly coming from an influencer, that I'm telling you that the digital world can often make it harder to access those experiences of joy. I find that particularly in bird walks and out in nature, it is near impossible to be both in the digital world and in the real life world. And so pulling ourselves away from that technology as much as we can help us reconnect to that joy and reconnect back to ourselves. I want to harp in on just one more point that I didn't really talk about a little bit earlier. As a disabled person, I want to mention this because I think it's really important. Our bodies change as we grow and we age, and becoming okay with who our bodies or what our bodies look like, regardless of what that stage or what that phase looks like, is ultimately vital in accessing these pieces of joy that I'm talking about. So I say here, we are not the bodies that we inhabit. We are, though, the emotional connections to self that we cultivate. So again, coming back to social media, I think unfortunately, we see so much online about what bodies are supposed to look like, and we are all supposed to have these perfectly able bodies and perfect hearing and perfect sight and perfect. But I want to remind us that those imperfections, much like the birds that we love so dearly, make us beautiful in our own way. And embracing them and allowing ourselves to connect back to the emotions that live underneath these bodies is what's going to really help us bring us back into that joy. So I'm bringing the definition just one more time because I love it so much, and I think it really helps us connect back to ourselves. So joy is an intentional choice for self in which happiness is curated, nurtured, and selected for the betterment of community, self, and environment. And I'll leave you with one more definition. If you can't tell, I love them, but I'll leave you with one more. And it's the concept of bird joy. And I've finagled it a little bit to share some of what we've been talking about today, but bird joy is the intentional act of allowing birds to gently reintroduce us to wonder, presence, and emotional connection after loss, burnout, or disconnection. That's all. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Oh, I do. I wonder, what does your doctor think of you now that you are a runner? I mean, that's pretty amazing. I don't know how much of that you'd like to share, but they said you may never walk again. And now
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so so he told me I would never walk again. I was living in Chicago at the time. And to be quite honest, I there was a period of time where I believed him. I moved to New York, I got a new physician's team, and I didn't tell them. So I did get medically cleared. But I started running. My first run walk was 0.44 miles. And I struggled. I almost fainted multiple times as I was running just because of the condition that I have. But I just kept increasing and believing that I could do it one foot in front of the other. There are a lot of runner sayings that we have that really helped me get to that place. There's one that I really love is what goes up must come down, which means those difficulties and those hills that we go up, they come right back down and you get that like breeze. And so I just kind of held on to that and the belief and lots of doctor's appointments to make sure I could get cleared because I've run 2 half marathons now, luckily. And I don't know how much I'll be able to continue running. So I'm just grateful for as much as I can get in now.
Wow. That's great. That's amazing.
Yeah, it wasn't an easy time for sure. And I did believe him, but then I was like, wait, no, you're wrong. Yeah. Thank you. This is also a QR code. So if you scan it, it'll take you to all of my content. Welcome to reach out. My email is thatquirkybirdgirl@gmail.com.